Hey, a quick update. I have given away and notified the winners of the Mercury Smart Wi-Fi Outdoor Security Camera and also the Mercury Smart Wi-Fi Light Switch. I've notified them and I haven't gotten any response yet, so I'm going to give them another week and then I'll draw again. So if you haven't entered yet, all you have to do is subscribe to the channel and you can have a chance to win. So you still might have a chance to win. Hit that subscribe button.
Okay, so we're going to take a look at this Kohler engine here. So here's the fuel line. And normally I keep very little gas in it, about right here. And if you notice, that is almost right the position of this highest line here. So anything above that, gravity would force back in, up and over, and flood the cylinder. Now, it was just a coincidence that this was one of the first times that I had ever turned the engine off with that much gas in it. Like I say, normally I'll put it about there, and then as I use the lawnmower, it's usually about down to here when I finish. Now this time I put gas in it and turned it off, which left the gas above the highest fuel line. So gravity would have forced it down and into the cylinder head. There. That is where the spark plug goes. So that's the top of the cylinder, top of the piston. Here's the fuel pump. What they call a fuel pump. Normally they have a shut-off line here somewhere. Somebody has replaced this whole line, so I wonder if they didn't replace or leave the fuel shut-off out. And now that I'm looking at it, I'm also seeing that the fuel line was ran different. When this happened just now or last week, this fuel line was just hanging down here and came back up. But I see that there's actually a bracket here, and that's where the fuel line's supposed to go. It's supposed to go here, be clamped against the engine. This thing has always had a hard time starting when it's warm, and what I think happened is that it ran out of fuel, and it is hard to restart when it's warm, and I tried to restart it quickly, ran the battery down, and I haven't been able to get the battery charged back up enough to give this thing a good start. And in the meantime, flooded this cylinder head with fuel that just couldn't get out without taking the spark plug out of it. And then over time, gravity kept just pushing this fuel right back in because I've been filling it up high. It has a higher level on it than I've ever had before. So this problem has probably always been here, but just coincidence, I have never I've never had all these things come together like this. So first thing I'm going to do is clean the spark plug up and put everything back together. I may give it a quick shot of starting fluid. I'm not sure about that yet. And see what happens. Okay, we're getting ready to get started. All right, I'm going to start out by putting the fuel line back on it. I have a clamp on the fuel line, so I'm going to put the fuel line back on it. Gonna hold it open while I shove it on. Now I hope when I release this clamp that I didn't do damage to this gas line, because fuel lines get gummed up inside, and a lot of times the inside will squeeze together and the outside looks normal, so you can't tell it, and the line's actually closed off inside. So we're hoping that that won't happen. And you can see here where this is where the gas line was supposed to be. You can see that. It wasn't, it was down here. Now that allowed that fuel to come down and back up. And since fluid always seeks the same level, it brought it up above the level of the piston cylinder. So I'm thinking that that fuel sought its own level and filled that cylinder up with fuel. So that's what I think happened. Now I'm going to put the spark plug back in, close up my fuel can. Since it sat overnight with the fuel line off, I wanted to make sure that any fuel that got through went back into the can. So now I'm going to find my spark plug. Now the plug is not really that bad. It was just real wet yesterday. It's dried up now. Where'd that come from? It dried up since yesterday, and it's going to be fine going back in. You always got to make sure that these spacer rings are on if they belong. Not everything has them. These had them, and they need to be on there. Need to make sure they're on there when they go back in. And this is a 5/8 spark plug socket with a permanent swivel extension. And this spark plug is deep. Is deep back into the head. So the only way you would be able to get this is with a purposely made spark plug socket with a swivel. So this is one of those deals where you have to have a specialized tool. Luckily, I just happen to have it, so it's a good thing. So I'm going to try to put this thing back in there. Now yesterday when I took it out, when I cranked the engine over, fuel shot out, and fuel shot out of the fuel pump. So I know that there was fuel in there. Whether that was keeping it from starting. Well, I know it did, but whether that was the main issue or not, I don't know. It would crank over, and then on about the 10th crank, it would backfire real loud. So, okay, so I have the spark plug back in it. I'm going to release the fuel. It looks like the fuel line maybe did collapse, so I might have to cut that and redo it, but we'll see. There's all the chickens come back. I don't know where they've been. They've been out visiting other people. They decided to come back. You can come in, come on. Come on. Come on, you can come in. I'm going to give this thing a little shot of starting fluid. Just because it's been so difficult to start, and I don't know how much of a charge I got on this battery charger, this charge pack. So when you're dealing with these lawnmowers, you also want to always make sure that all of your safety devices are engaged, because you have to have those engaged in order for it to start. So the PTO needs to be off. Make sure the PTO is off. Some of them have a seat switch. That could be an issue. I'm not sure on this whether the seat switch has been bypassed or not. Also, your parking brake switch. Parking brake must be engaged in order for these things to start. So you got to make sure you have that engaged. So make sure all your safety devices are engaged. We're going to see what this thing sounds like when it tries to crank. Doesn't sound good. For one thing, that's a very slow crank. This pack is not doing what it's supposed to do. I'm probably going to have to bring this thing up front and jump it with a car battery. These things, you have to get them spinning fast. And if you can't get them spinning, especially these Kohler engines, it's not going to start. And I hit that thing with starting fluid, and it still didn't fire. So it tells me there's some other issue. Could be this seat switch. Although I don't see where the seat switch engages unless it's some type of Mercury switch. Because I don't see any engagement point on the seat switch. It's definitely not firing. Oh, I know why. Stupid me. I may have just messed the whole process up, because you know what I didn't do was plug the spark plug wire in. Make sure you do that. Don't do like me. Now I think I probably just loaded the thing up with fuel again. So I may have to do this whole process over again. Okay, make sure you feel that plug wire snap. Now, it should have fired. So we definitely have not enough power to jump it over, and I smell gas already, so we already have an issue. So I'm going to clamp this thing off. Keep that fuel out of there. I'm going to push it up to a car and try to jump it off of a car and see what that does. If at all possible, you need to make sure that you remove the seat switch, which I don't suggest doing because you'll forget about it, and sure as you forget about it, you go to step off this thing and got your feet under the deck and get your feet cut off. I don't suggest doing that. So you need to know for sure. You need to know for sure whether your seat switch is engaged or disengaged. I know for sure this one works. So I need to do everything I can to get this seat back in its normal position so that I can make the switch work. I need to make sure that the park switch is working. If it's not working, that's one thing, but if it is working, you have to make sure that the parking brake is engaged. Make sure that you get a good charge on the battery or that you have a jump. I'm jumping mine off a vehicle right now. Should be plenty of power to get this thing going. My battery pack, I've had issues before. I've had issues jumping cars. I've had issues jumping lawnmowers with that thing. I think it was just a bad one. I paid a lot of money for it, actually. I think I got ripped off. I bought it last minute, and I paid more than it was worth, and I don't think it does a very good job. So I did crimp that line off so that that cylinder doesn't fill up with fuel again. I've had these jumper cables on for a little while. Now the only variable here is these jumper cables are some of those cheap ones that you get at Walmart. They're absolute crap. Though I don't suggest anybody ever buy those cheap jumper cables at Walmart. And even the ones you think are good, it looks like they have a really good thick cable on them. A lot of times that's just a wrap, and because copper is so expensive, they make them look like they're good battery cables, jumper cables. I have seen them, I've cut into them, and there's no cable, there's no copper there. They're actually just wrapped. So a lot of times those jumper cables are no better than these crappy ones here. Now, anytime you do a lot of jumping of a vehicle, or if it's very cold outside, these cables will not do. If it's cold outside, it's going to zap the power out of these cables, and I'm telling you, they won't work. Cheap cables like this are basically garbage. If you have them, go get some good ones, throw these away. So I'm going to give this a few more minutes, and then I'm going to give it a shot and see what it does. Okay, so the only thing that concerns me about this whole thing, one thing that does concern me, is that I did check all this stuff. All right, it should, now that it has the power going to it, you should hear it really try to fire off now. It should be spinning really fast. Now, I checked the oil, and there's no smell in the oil, and there's no gasoline in the oil. Now, unless this thing has really good rings in it, you would think that there would be some gas in the crankcase, in the oil, but there's not. But there was absolutely gasoline in the cylinder head, so we'll see. It must have really good rings. So, but I'm going to give it a shot, just a quick shot of starting fluid. The only reason I'm doing that is because it's been so long since I put it in back there. It's been at least 45 minutes, and that would have dissipated. Starting fluid doesn't stay in the spot very long. It evaporates very, very quickly. I'm only doing this because this thing is normally hard to start, and that being the case, I want to have every opportunity for this thing to fire off. Now, it may take a few times of cranking because, remember, I've drained the gasoline out of this line, and this line has been crimped off. So that means the fuel pump is probably dry also. So we're going to have to let all of the fuel get into all these different areas. So that's where the starting fluid hopefully is going to help me out. All right. Now all of the safety switches are engaged, so we're going to give this thing a shot. I don't know why I just did that. It still isn't cranking fast enough. There's no fire. There's no fire there. I'm going to start the vehicle. See if that let it set and charge for a while and try again. Now, hopefully you know that anytime you jump anything off of a vehicle, it's better to have it running. You should always have it running and make sure all your accessories are off, including your heater, your air conditioner. Make sure the stereo is off, not just turned down. Make sure it is off. All accessories turned off. If it's the winter time and nighttime, early morning, make sure your dome light does not come on. Make sure everything is off. You'd be surprised nowadays, these vehicles, they have so many accessories. They put out exactly what they have to have. They have very little room for error on their charging systems now. Back in the good old days, they always had some reserve. There was extra charge. Nowadays, they use up everything that they put out. So we're going to give that a little while. I'll probably go ahead and stop the video again. I'll pick it back up here in a few minutes. I'm going to let this. We really need to get a good crank on this thing. This thing should be spinning much faster than that. It makes me wonder if there's some other issue I'm not seeing, because that engine should be cranking much faster. Okay, I'm charging with the car running, accessories off for about 15 minutes. See what happens here. Okay, that's much closer to what it should be. Okay, we're getting fire out of the intake, so I think we've got a broken valve. It's either out of time, broken valve. All right, so the last time we saw this unit, I was cranking it, and it was hooked up to the car, getting some extra juice. We were jumping it off the car because I felt like it just wasn't cranking fast enough, and it wasn't. And what has happened is I have switched gears with as far as the project goes. The backfiring out of the intake was indicative of, or could be caused by several things. Somewhat out of time, or a broken valve, or even a bent valve. And those things can happen when you shut an engine off, or if especially one of these types of engines, gasoline, lawn tractors or lawnmower engines. If you shut them off when they're running at a high RPM, like if they're running max power, and you shut them off without bringing down the RPM, you just shut them off especially if they're hot when you do it. You can't have them kind of almost like a dieseling backwards. It's almost like I guess you shut them down abruptly. The fuel stops flowing to them, but whatever fuel is in the cylinder head at the time you shut it down under a fast RPM goes ahead and ignites, and because it's not advancing forward, it can bend or break a valve. And I believe that's what's happened to this engine. Let me take a look here. What we have here, now when I piece this all together, you will just have seen this hooked to the car. Well, that's been a week and a half ago when that occurred. So the unit would not start. No matter what I did, it would not start. It did have fuel in the cylinder. I did determine that it absolutely was getting fuel in the cylinder, and once that happened, once I shut it off under a high RPM, and I had more fuel in it than I used to ever keep. So once I shut it off under a high RPM, whatever happened to the valve happened, and because it didn't have a flow valve to shut off the flow from the gasoline gravity fed into the cylinder head. And when I went to fire it up, I either made the valve worse, bent the valve worse, or the valve was already bent in a manner that it was never going to start anyway, or it was out of time in a manner that it was never going to start. Now, let's think back of what happened. I shut it off under, it was under high RPM. I shut it off. It sputtered and popped, and then kind of made a quick, very loud backfire, and I immediately tried to start it. It wouldn't start. I let it set, thinking that if I let it set and it cooled down, it would start. That's what it used to do. It's always been hard to start, but I let it cool down, and when I went back to start it, it was real slow, like it was under a lot of load. Like the battery was dead, or there was something going on internal in the engine. Charged the battery, still didn't get any better, still didn't sound right, so I even put starting fluid to it, nothing. So I pulled the spark plug out and turned it over, and fuel shot out the cylinder. Looked at the spark plug was it was burned. It was just wet, completely soaked with fuel. So the cylinder had been filling up with fuel. So cleaned everything out, reset everything, charged the battery. Went to fire it up again, nothing. Even with starting fluid, would not get fire, would not catch fire. I put a tester on the plug wire, I put a tester on the plug itself. Both of those tested good. The magneto's working. We are getting fire. We're definitely getting fire through the spark plug. We're definitely getting fire through the spark plug wire. So there's no reason that this engine shouldn't fire. Put starting fluid into the intake, and what do we get? We get fire shooting out of the intake. So we're gonna call it quits on this one. This thing needs to be taken disassembled more to diagnose it any further. So that would be the end of this video. You would tear this engine on down, or you would look for another engine. If you're not comfortable tearing the engine down, you would look for another engine you could put on this thing. So we're going to stop there with that video. Now we're going to pick up with something else. Remember, I have 3 different units available here. I'm going to get all of these out. This is a Husqvarna with a Kohler John Deere 15 horsepower engine. It is an automatic. All right. Hydrostatic drive. Automatic. Okay, clouds are looking bad, but we'll see if we can get some of this through. Okay, let's take a look at what we have here. Okay, we have a Pull & Pro 500. I don't know what that means. It originally had a 19.5 horsepower big Briggs & Stratton. This is a John Deere LA 105 19.5 Briggs & Stratton. The Pull & Pro is a hydrostatic drive. The John Deere is not. It is a manual 5-speed. That means you have to change the gear, and it kind of pops a little bit, takes off the hydrostatic drive. Whichever way you're pointing your toe on the right side, that is what controls forward or back. Forward, back. It's considered an automatic. Other than that, if you look at the bodies, they're almost the same. A lot of the same parts. A lot of the parts are reusable from one to the other. A lot of the parts are reusable. A lot of the parts up here, a lot of the accessory parts, steering wheel, seat, all these parts are reusable. Now, Pull & Pro has a 46-inch cut. The John Deere had a measly 42-inch. Here's the decks. Many of the same parts. Now, there's a difference in the stamping on these decks. And the bigger deck is a little bit heavier, more heavy duty. You notice the wheels on the deck are a little heavier. The John Deere has a plastic hood and front end, which is very good because it's light. It's lighter than all that metal. So it's actually a better thing to have a plastic front end on one of these. Wheels and tires are basically the same on both, identical. I believe the Pull & Pro, no, the Husqvarna had one bigger, I think. We'll go take a look at it quickly too. Now there's the front end on the Pull & Pro inside the barn. It is all metal. It is identical front end to the Pull & Pro. Just different trims and different color, but they are identical. Now, if we go over take a look at the Husqvarna. It's getting really dark out here. It's daytime, folks. I don't know what it looks like on here, but it's really getting bad out here. I'm gonna have to get in the house. Here is the Husqvarna. It would have that same front end as the Pull & Pro. Everything else is identical to the Pull & Pro. Everything. These are identical parts other than the nameplate. The placement of this stuff, everything is identical. The decks are 100% identical. 46 inch. They will automatically, you could take one off and just put it right onto the other. They fit perfectly. Now the Pull & Pro and the Husqvarna are both just a little bigger than the John Deere. I believe the wheelbase may even be just a little bit longer. And that accounts for the bigger cutting deck. But many parts interchange on all of these equipment. So since this unit is out of commission, the engine's bad, but it has all these good parts. Had a good deck. I had fixed the deck. I had already replaced a bunch of the bearings and a bunch of the hardware on the Husqvarna deck. Now I had taken the parts off of the Pull & Pro because they were identical decks. So I took the parts off the Pull & Pro, I put them on the Husqvarna. I made one perfect deck. Now, I was using the John Deere deck broke. This is the only oddball deck. It's a 42 inch and the weld broke on the deck and the deck is not usable. The blades hit the deck inside and the deck could be repaired, but it would be costly if I took it somewhere, or if I had the stuff to do it myself, it'd just be a big job. So the Pull & Pro, the deck has been scavenged to make the Husqvarna deck. So I have a John Deere with an engine that runs. I have a Husqvarna with a deck that works. The John Deere has a 42 inch deck. It's a 46 inch deck on the Pull & Pro. On the Husqvarna. So I decided to switch over to the John Deere. And in order to do that, I have to make some adjustments to the deck on the Husqvarna to make it work. Now,
Hey, if you like my videos, if you like this kind of content, be sure and subscribe to my channel. If you think somebody else will be interested, make sure you share the videos, give us a thumbs up, and this video is going to continue. The next video coming up is going to be how I replace this 42 inch deck with a 46 inch. So be sure to hit that bell icon. You'll get notified when that video becomes available. So remember, they may do it another way, but that's the way I do it. We'll see you next time.